This final best practice standard on monitoring and evaluation represents one of the most important and challenging aspects of running a successful family treatment court. This best practice tells courts about collecting data and analyzing it regularly to evaluate success, as well as sharing and using that data to make changes. I'd like to take a pause here to thank our funding sources and partners, as well as to request that you take a moment to pause and reflect on why you're interested in this work, a moment of gratitude to the land and the people, past and present, who have brought us to this learning space together. Best Practice 8 is broken down into these 4 provisions. We maintain data electronically, engage in a process of continuous quality improvement, we often call this CQI for short, evaluate adherence to best practice, and use rigorous evaluation methods. I want to start by giving a brief update on data collection for family treatment courts in Washington State and on the Family Treatment Court Grant, because this included a significant section on data and research practices, as well as resources to help in each of those areas. The most valuable of these resources is our staff team member, the research associate on this grant. This member of our team has been working since mid-2021 to bring together data collection methods from FTC partners and to assist local sites in meeting their data collection goals. This includes a lot of background meetings, information gathering, discussions with HCA and DCYF about privacy, and making sure that we're all able to get and collect the data in the most direct and easy way possible for our court teams. In 2022, we started a Just Data January initiative to bring all of the FTCs in the state an easy tool to collect data electronically and ideas for how to use this data in their practices. This tool is a performance measures spreadsheet available on the data resources part of our website, which you can also find via the links below this video. This spreadsheet is a simple way to collect data regularly and will also give Washington FTCs the ability to compare their data to state averages. With the hard work of our research associate and the amazing coordinators at local sites, 18 of the family treatment courts in Washington collected standardized performance measures data in January of 2022. An additional 2 family healing to wellness courts have also been joining us in sharing information and teachings based on the best practices for tribal wellness courts and developed by their individual tribal governments. All of these courts have plans to collect performance measures regularly in order to meet and exceed the standards that are set in the first provision of best practice. This is a remarkable achievement. In addition, 13 of those 22 family-focused or healing to wellness courts are maintaining records using a case management system like DCCM, Connexus, or some other case management software. That's about 59%. This is an area that we are working on at the state level to help better support local sites in terms of training and implementation of a case management system that is appropriate for their court, particularly when resources are scarce. As you can see, Washington has already done an immense amount of work in order to increase the amount of data that we're collecting so that we're able to show how well family treatment courts can support families and look for areas we can work to improve. There are many reasons to maintain electronic data records, but some of the most important reasons for these electronic records, at least according to best practice standards, are ease of use, change management, and evidence-based practices. So thinking just about ease of use, we're talking about heritability of knowledge to future teams. One of my colleagues always used to say we have to prepare in case one day we have to call out Rich. We want to be able to share that data with other people and make it really easy to do so. We also want simple reporting ability to grant holders, fundraisers, and stakeholders. We know we don't always have a lot of time to apply for grants or when opportunities come, so having reporting be relatively easy is pretty important. And then also standardization of data allows for comparison either with your court and future court data from the same area, for state level court comparisons, for research, and for identification of areas that you might want to improve. The second part of this is change management. So electronic records will increase a court's ability to make modifications, track changes, and ensure that those changes that you make have a positive outcome. It also allows others to learn from your example in order to implement similar strategies in their own courts. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next provision. In addition, this is evidence-based. A review of adult drug courts found that there were higher graduation rates in courts that had electronic records and some form of CQI process, while courts that were using paper records were associated with higher investment costs and in lower graduation rates. This is a study from MPC Research in 2008. You can find it relatively easily, but we'll also have a link on the website just below this video. So I wanted to give you a little note just about data entry. We know that very few people enjoy data entry, aside from maybe some of our research associates. And I can speak to this because in my graduate program, entering the data after my experiments was just the part that I loathed. I would put it off as long as possible. But, at the same time, we also know that entering that data immediately leads to less mistakes. There's a very well-known theory in academia that's been tested a number of different ways called the forgetting curve. You can see a little graph of that over to the right-hand side of your screen. And this is just about how much of the information that you're given you're able to retain over time. The general thought is that after 48 hours from when you learn something or experience something, your recall is less than 50%, particularly on the details. And then after 7 days or 1 week, almost all of the detail of that encounter, of that event, is lost. So when we're thinking about data entry, as much as you hate it, it's really important to have someone that's assigned that duty, have that be one of those things that you have the discipline to have regularly on your calendar, and try to enter it immediately after something has occurred. So provision B, the next provision, is about engaging in a process of continuous quality improvement. So this idea of continuous quality improvement, or CQI, is an intentional, repeating process of making changes and testing to improve your outcomes. The Capacity Building Center for Courts has wonderful resources on this CQI process, in addition to what you'll find in the best practice document. So all of that will be linked below the video as well, and is in our data portion of the website, so it's pretty easy to find. When we're thinking about CQI in particular, that part about being intentional is really important. We want to be thinking about using a careful planning process where courts can evaluate which changes in particular can make the greatest impact. So what do you have the most resources for? What is able to be changed, as opposed to just what's most exciting at that time? And then thinking about it being gradual means, changes take time. Small improvements that are carefully monitored lead to proven success over time. If we try to change too many things all at once, then we aren't always sure which one of those is the most successful. So making this change a little slower, a little more gradually, and really, really intentional can help to mediate that confusion over what changes are the most successful. And then also tracking the progress as we're doing this. So thinking about how data-driven changes can improve outcomes. They help us to show our successes. They help us to prove that what we're doing is effective. And this helps both with team members. So if you want to talk to your local social workers and see if we can bring someone else on board as your team is growing, or you want to talk to new folks that are coming on to this area of work, and you want to make sure that they understand how successful family treatment courts can be, while having that progress that you're tracking over time, it's a really easy way to show, we know that this works, and we want you to be a part of it as well. One of the processes that the Capacity Building Center for Courts has worked on, really has some great resources in, is called change management. There are other processes for doing continuous quality improvement, but I think that this one is probably the one that Washington State has the most resources for and most examples for, and it's also really effective. In my opinion, it works really similarly to how the scientific method works, where we're identifying a really, intentional change that that needs to be taken care of. We are assessing the needs and opportunities that we have available using data that we've already collected. We develop a really clear process called a theory of change that both determines the root causes of whatever the issues that we want to fix and also develops a need assessment. So what are the specific things that might help that root cause to be ameliorated or helped? We design an intervention directly using available resources, making sure that we have the team members available that we need in order to choose the right intervention and implement it properly. And we design that process very carefully. And then we make a plan, we prepare, we implement, we consider equity, we consider timelines, how we're going to collect data planned even before we actually start data collection, as well as how we're going to compare that to other data sets in the future. And then using that plan, we evaluate on a regular basis. We test and check to see if this was effective. If it wasn't effective or parts were not effective, there were any barriers to that successfulness, then we decide as a team, should this work continue? Should we modify and pivot? Do we need to change something or not? And if we don't, awesome, we can implement that. We can still continue to check to make sure it's being effective with a changing community, but also move on to another change that we might want to make in order to keep that continuous intentional, small, incremental change, and also keep building positive momentum. It's really important that we're repeating this process continuously, that we're making incremental changes, careful data collection, and we're trying to make changes over time, not immediately. Although, if you find an immediate change that works, of course, do that. But also have an eye for the future, an eye for the needs of a future growing community and growing court. Our team at AOC has put together a sample of this process. Using a hypothetical family treatment court team, we took the performance measures data, set up a fake data set, and looked at what some areas for improvement might be. And in our example, we go through as a team to show what sorts of questions you might ask at every stage, what sorts of team members you might need, what are the really effective ways to looking at making a change. In this case, this hypothetical court decided to look at racial equity data and then try to make a change in order to serve more families of color within their court. And then over time, they were able to continue reporting on performance measures and make comparisons after they've made some changes, go in and decide whether those changes were effective and make plans for the future. So it's just one example of how you might do a change management process. Of course, your individual court should be deciding based on whatever data that you've collected and whatever goals your team has in order to make that process most effective for your local community. We also are happy to make an appointment. You can click on either of these buttons for further information. Our team is happy to come and discuss change management with you, set your team up in a training type environment or just a discussion environment with your first change management meeting, and try and figure out what might be the best things to focus on for your court based on your goals. So feel free to get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to help you out in getting started. One last note for you as we're considering this process of continuous quality improvement, self-evaluation within the courts, is that it's really important that you and your team all come at this process looking with a growth mindset, with a baseline of curiosity and hope for change. We know that the community has had numerous changes over the past few years and even the last decades in terms of how substance use disorder, substance misuse is impacting our communities, in terms of our understanding of how different populations might be interacting with the courts, and our knowledge about how racism might be impacting the court processes. And we know that we also really want what's best for our families. So as we're looking at our data, as we're coming across opportunities for growth and change, it's great if you can do some work with your team to make sure you're all in that mindset, that there's nothing punitive about the CQI process. Instead, this is an opportunity for us to look at our data in a real open posture of change and growth and see where we need to make improvements. Provision C of Best Practice 8 is focused on how we can evaluate adherence to best practices. And I have to say that Washington family treatment courts have rocked this. As of right now, in August of 2022, 100% of the family treatment courts in Washington submitted an NEFTC self-evaluation. So that was a process that you have gone through over the last year or two, depending on when you did it. 11 sites, in addition, met with our research associate to discuss the results of that self-assessment and to sort of brainstorm about how to continue to grow or if there was any needed implementation of best practice standards. That assessment is huge, and it presents a great opportunity to point out places where you might want to do some work and also to recognize the successes in some of the work you've already done. So we at AOC really appreciate how much work went into doing those assessments, and we hope that you'll continue to use that information. We also have one more tool that you can use in order to help with that adherence to best practice standards using the NEFTC assessment, and that is a self-review that was developed by our research associate, Dr. Michaela Mize-Bowers, and is now available on the website. That will guide you to what parts of best practices those questions are coming from and some ways that you might look to make improvements if those areas that you currently answered no on are areas that you'd like to change your answer to a yes. So that's all available on our website, as I've mentioned numerous times. You'll also see the links as well embedded into this video and in the PDF version of this document. This slide is primarily here for those of you who are reading through this document using the slides or the PDF, and it will be embedded with links that you can use to get to different resources that are either listed in the best practices document or just resources I happen to know are useful. For instance, the California Clearinghouse that'll guide you towards evidence-based practices and the research that's been done on them. So go ahead, click on those links, check out those tools and places for more information, and do feel free to email us if you have other resources that would be helpful, especially to new FTC team members, and we'd be happy to add those to our list as well. As we are thinking still about this process of evaluation, one of the questions that we are asked most regularly is, when should this happen? How often? And there are indeed some guidelines for best practice in this area. First of all, in terms of regularity of evaluations, we should be reviewing our policies, procedures, and other documentation yearly with consideration for how well our court processes match to best practices. And that should happen, at every major turnover of staff as well, to make sure that new team members are aware of local policies. Putting this in as a regular part of a staff retreat or setting up a small evaluation committee that meets yearly will help to keep you on track and set a practice that will go more smoothly each time that you do it. We can also do this policy and procedures eval in addition to our twice yearly performance measures data collection, right? So we're evaluating our policies and procedures, our manuals, and even our MOUs in consideration of best practices. And we're also comparing any updates in those practices to our performance measures data, which allows us to get some idea of outcomes over time and if any changes that we've documented had an impact, positive or negative, on those outcomes. In doing this methodically, we can look specifically for what we call drift. So this would be drift away from our mission, drift away from your desired outcomes, or drift away from fidelity to the best practice model. I've shown a simplified form of this in a hypothetical court in the little pretend graph of data that I've set up on the upper right corner of your slide. And if we think about this as measuring just one specific outcome, like graduation rate, we could easily see on this graph that in 2022, there's a big drop in the rate. And we also see these smaller changes each year leading up to the big drop. So for sure, 2022 or even earlier would be a great time to put a committee together, set up a change management task force, and decide to either roll back a change the court has already implemented or to make a change that better serves the current needs of the families and community. Looking at this type of simple data annually allows us to get ahead of any issues before they get too large and to keep monitoring for effectiveness as you move forward with your team. Provision D, our final provision, is focused on the use of rigorous evaluation methods. Previously, we primarily considered an in-house annual evaluation, and this last provision gives us some recommendations for how to do a full program evaluation, which is recommended about every 3 to 5 years. A full program eval should generate some form of report with recommendations for improvement of outcomes and for better adherence to best practices. In essence, this is saying that we can always improve. And when we're evaluating at the program level, we should be looking with an eye for opportunities to improve. As one of my former professors like to say, we should always aim to look back and be surprised at how much we've improved. So today is always our best day. Having a detailed report of these recommendations will guide committee work as well as your annual evaluation meetings. In addition, when we're evaluating, we should be looking at all of our collaborative systems. If we're only evaluating changes we can make at the court level while ignoring pivots we might need to make in treatment or to better fill gaps in what DCYF is able to offer, we're missing valuable opportunities. If we aren't considering what our program participants are telling us via feedback or exit interviews, that means that we're leaving out a critical part of why FTCs work. And finally, there is very compelling evidence that courts that hire an independent contractor to do those program evaluations tend to be more cost-effective and have better outcomes. Being rigorous and thorough is difficult, and hiring this task out can free up a major piece of workload, add expertise, and remove some potential for bias. So there are a few tips from the best practices document on program evaluation. The biggest one, just thinking about cost. Hiring an independent evaluator can be costly. However, many courts are able to stop this from becoming cost prohibitive by developing a partnership with a university or college and have that evaluation occur as part of a student thesis or dissertation project. Your court may be able to partner in this way for a much lower cost while still having the supervision of a professor who has a high level of expertise. Regardless of who is conducting that evaluation, do be sure that at the beginning, before the evaluation occurs, that you decide as a team who owns that data and can use any reports or publications that are generated from the data. Specifically, you want to think about where the data will be stored and how it will be used. Most universities have what's called an IRB process or institutional review board process that will require most of that information. Private enterprises might be slightly different. So you want to make sure that you're protecting the privacy of your court participants as well as making sure that you have the ability to use that data in your future work with the court. Well, that's it. That's your best practice concerning data monitoring and evaluation. We know that the challenges associated with data collection and its use can be very daunting. However, the rewards are also very obvious when you see the families thriving. We hope that you will reach out if you need any technical assistance from us or our partners, and also that you'll reach out to celebrate your successes with us. Appreciate you listening and learning more about best practices in family treatment courts in Washington.